Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third of our roundtables on challenges in digital assessment, produced by the Technology-Based Assessment Committee of the ATP. Today, we've got two really strong speakers. Please keep yourself on mute. We may have time for questions at the end. We'd certainly welcome questions in the chat at any time, and please just use the chat. The session is being recorded, and we'll put it up on YouTube. And I'm just going to give a very brief introduction and then hand over to our speakers. So the guidelines for technology-based assessment were produced in November 2022 by a large team of over 100 people, jointly between the ATP and the International Test Commission. And ATP has now established a technology-based assessment committee, which promotes awareness and use of the guidelines, supports translations, updates, events around the guidelines like this, provides a forum for sharing best practices in technology-based assessment. And we've also just set up an AI subcommittee, which is seeking to provide best practice guidance in using AI in assessments. Your host today are myself, John Kleeman, and I'm from Lenosity, and I'm going to be sort of hosting about the first half of the meeting. And then Pat Ward, who's from Internet Testing Systems, who's the vice chair of the committee, will host the second half of the session. And we have, this is a third roundtable, and if you want to look at recordings of the last two, you can see them on YouTube at that address there. And do bring me or Pat if you've got any questions or anything. Our speakers today, we have Norihisa Wada, who's from the Global EdTech Acceleration Committee in Japan. She's going to talk about gamification and assessment. And then we've got Kimberly Swigert from the NBME, the National Board of Medical Education in the US. He's going to talk about technology-based items. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Nori, just to say that as well as his role with the Global EdTech Acceleration Committee, he's also very involved in some large exam boards in Japan. And in a past, during his career, he led a team that produced several of the major Nintendo brain training and other games, which I suspect he'll touch on briefly in his conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Nori to talk about gamification and assessment.
Thank you, Johnson. Let me just share my screen. So can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. My part is on gamification in assessment today. And the big question here, how can we take feelings from games and apply them into assessments, especially in integrated learning and assessment? By and large, games, of course, both casual and core games, are played for entertainment pleasure rather than learning or intellectual and behavioral challenge. That's not true for everyone, but it's true for many. What are the elements and mechanics of games that grab our attention, keep us motivated and engaged? What are important elements and mechanics of games for behavior change? Games are full of integrated assessment and learning. Game designers maximize user engagement by utilizing integrated assessment and learning element, which is more familiarly known to them or to me in the past as an important element of game mechanics. Like Johnson just introduced me, I created many educational games for Nintendo DS and Wii Fitness games in the past. So my interest is, can we take away anxiety of taking tests and change the long fixed perception to fun to take tests? Can we create an environment where test takers will not even know they are assessed, stealthy assessed? Some of our esteemed audiences may find hard to relate to game mechanics. So I would like to take you back to your childhood and bring back the memories that we were all once a game designers in life by using these three stories. This is a picture of you walking from school to home, and it's a tedious long walk home. But once you start imagining there is an obstacle that you have to avoid, then it becomes a dramatic adventure. Second story, your mother asked you to do a daunting sweep of a floor, and this is boring. But once you start imagination and using imagination and imagine the coins are on the floor and you have to pick them up, then it becomes an exciting time trial. The third story, parents are not watching. You're playing around with your friends in a sandbox. Then you can play freely. You can create all ugly creatures like this without parents seeing you. So what I'm trying to show you here is that in these three stories, there are already many principles that game elements and game mechanics put to good use to make an experience more engaging and fun. The first element is meaning. How to make experience and activity connect to the user in a meaningful fashion, to players' interests, passions, and goals. Second element, mastery. How to craft an experience in such a way that the player gets the sense of progressing towards goals of achieving something and feeling competent. Third element, autonomy. A sense of freedom, a sense of being left alone to the player's mischief, a sense of being able to curiously explore opportunities without necessarily any kind of functional outcomes attached to what you are doing. So let's drill into each of the elements. First, I would like to start from the meaning. How does video game achieve kind of meanings to the activity? The tricks that we use in the video games is that we usually wrap them in a story. In the case of Mario Brothers, only you can save the Peach Princess is the main storyline. The kind of overarching narrative gives meaning to all the goals, all the levels, all the activities in between, connecting them to something meaningful on the long end. Second element, mastery. And this is a very important element. Does giving rewards, giving incentives to behavior create an engaging game? Some people think motivation and engagement can be driven by just giving coins and badges. But this is a very famous research done in the past. One is the Skinner box and the other is the progress wars. Skinner box, basically every time you hit the lever, you get rewards, which in this case is a sugar palette. Progress wars is every time you hit the button, you are rewarded with progress. So this bar gets longer and longer. But this is not really a very engaging activity, not really rewarding. So why is that games are very rewarding? I would like to use the definition by Ralph Castor here. Fun is just another word for learning. Fun from games arises out of mastery. It rises out of comprehension. It is the act of solving puzzles that makes games fun. With games, learning is the drug. So with all due respect, I would like to add one short phrase here to Ralph Castor's definition of mastery. Fun is just another word for learning under optimal conditions. So what is an optimal condition? Under optimal conditions, first, challenges needs to be interesting. For an example of golf, basically in golf, putting this little ball into this little hole is not interesting. But if you add rules, you have to use a golf club. You must start from a certain point. You have to start from wherever the ball ends up, create interesting challenges. And also, clear visual present goals. In the example of the golf, it is putting a ball into the end hole. And also, under optimal conditions, well-structured full goals. Not too hard, not too easy, and the difficulty increases by time and scale. So basically, well-structured full goals and scaffolded challenges apply to this. Fifth, under optimal conditions, game designers need to think about varied pacing, because varied pacing provides failures to learn from and valuing the sense of accomplishment. when you finally achieve it. So success feels more and more rewarding. And under optimal conditions, kind of difficulty are not just more of the same. So it's not about the volume of the challenges, but variety vector, the quality, the depth, complexity added. This gives more variation to the challenges and more rewards to the accomplishment that you resolve these challenges. And under optimal conditions, excessive positive feedback. So once you clear the very difficult challenge, then you get a juicy feedback. So these are some of the game designers' tips on creating the optimal conditions. So mastery, the optimal condition, put to good use is Mario Kart. In Mario Kart, there is a function called Ghost in time trial mode. So when you first play through a certain level or the game, your goal really is to just get through it. But then through repetition, you actually get better and better. In Mario Kart Ghost mode, you're always stealthy asset. So the game is actually capturing your first course that you took to reach the goal. And then it gives you a ghost on the second run. So basically you're competing and you're learning from yourself through this ghost. So it is easy and reachable goal to overcome, a reachable, easy challenge to overcome. So this is one good case of optimal condition mastery. But what you need to be careful about is the unintended emergent behaviors. This is another example of a Nintendo personal trainer. It's basically a pedometer game. We intended to develop this for humans to compete with each other, to walk and get healthy. But we found out on a social media, the blog, that the dog was wearing a pedometer. And we looked through the records of this competition and found out one person was amongst the top level in this competition. And it turned out to be, it was a dog. So we always have to be careful about the intended use and behaviors. So the very important lesson from here is to avoid in unintended emergent behaviors. You have to play and evaluate your own system. We call this game your own system. The third element, autonomy. Autonomy is the freedom, the play space where players are allowed to be involved in his or her own mischief. Very important in productivity context. One of the core elements of play and games that make motivating, according to many research, are that they are by definition voluntary activity. Autonomy, the core element of play and games, is easily damaged if you slip the extrinsic reward on an activity. We call this the perils of extrinsic rewards. So to avoid damage, no strings attached, shared goals, individual pursuit, informational and helpful feedback rather than controlling feedbacks, unexpected rewards. These all help to avoid damage. So, takeaways. Game elements provide a solid foundation for thinking about integrated assessment and learning beyond just adding superficial points and badges. Games provide seamless experience of learning and stealthy assessment while providing immersive experience. They offer an opportunity to engage players and embed behavior change into the learning experience. Creating a fully immersive GBA, game-based assessment, may require cost and time compared to traditional assessment times, but using elements and mechanics of games may be an easy entry, especially in low stakes or mid stakes. It's preferable to have cross-professional team to develop and deliver well-designed GBA. I strongly believe game design is full of science, just like assessment design is full of science. So please become a good user of game principles and mechanics for better learning experience and contribute to a behavior change. Thank you.
Thank you, Nori-san. Kimberly, do I see your hand up there? If so, please jump in with a question.
No, you actually saw me putting up the clapping hand icon.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you. It was a very good introduction to game-based assessment that I really enjoyed, even though I've heard something like it a bit before. And some comments in the chat about dogs and things that I'm sure we could go onto in a while. Let's ask us a serious question. So, like, if somebody's thinking about building a game-based assessment, and presumably they would need a bit of a budget for that, what sort of typical team size and what kind of roles do you need? Is this something you need programmers, game designers? What kind of people?
Yes, it's a good question, John. First of all, I think it depends on what kind of game that you want to create. Whether you are trying to create an immersive game-based assessment, or whether you want to use game element in your assessment. And I think team differs. But if you were to create a very immersive game-based assessment, it's a multi-professional team. It has to be a multi-professional team. For example, from the assessment side, subject matter experts, cognitive scientists, psychometricians. From the game side, of course, the game designers. And if you wanted to make the experience more immersive, maybe a game narrator. So, I think it depends on what kind of game experience or the game elements that you want to use in assessment, as well as whether it's high stakes, mid stakes, or low stakes.
And in terms of budget, I mean, if somebody's looking at producing a game, are we talking sort of $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? Or does it just depend how big you're trying to make it?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, creating an immersive game, like for example, like Nintendo, it's the budgets is like it depends on the quality of the graphics and stuff like that, but usually tends to be like from the cheapest would be $5,000. Then it goes up to, you tell me it goes up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've got a few more questions, but there's one from Brody in the audience. How do you see standard gaming integrating with traditional testing? So you have a game and test. Do they have any connection?
What do you mean by standard?
Well, I suppose the more conventional tests, like the tests that a lot of people here will be involved in doing, multiple choice, or so if you're using game-based assessment to do assessment, then how do you combine that or integrate it or connect it to more conventional tests?
Got it. I see. So I see several games or game elements being used in like assessing skills like social and emotional learning, SEL skills, like item types like the situational judgments, and the others would be like simulation types of games used in medical field. One is how do you practice talking to your patient? How do you nurture your empathies with your patients? Those dialogue-based situations.
And how would you, so if somebody's starting in this area, how would you advise somebody to get started, or what can they do? Because it sounds like a lot of different skills and components are needed here to do something well. How do you get started?
Right. So if you want to create a good assessment that incorporates game elements or fully immersive game-based assessment, it has to be a cross-professional team. So create a cross-professional team, and whether you're from the game side or from the assessment side, you have to have a common knowledge of the objective. So the validity issue, the reliability issue, the precision issue has to be shared and understood by the game designers. And this is critical because in the end, we're assessing someone's skills here.
So a follow-up question then, is there a risk that you can spend a lot of time and energy making a game and it might be great fun to play, but it doesn't actually either help people learn or help assess?
Yes, I have to be careful answering this question. Actually, my dream is like people doesn't even know they're being assessed. That is the ideal, and taking tests is fun. That is my ideal, but yes. So I think, why are you using games in your assessment? And how do you want to use this to assess what is in the end very important? And if you don't forget about the main objective, then it's about the tasting of the game and the balance of game design. I don't know if I really answered your question right, but
well, your at least it's half an answer, I think, which is good. So, if anybody else has any questions, I've maybe got one more question here. We've got another couple of minutes if anybody would like to ask a question. Pat's commenting in the chat that he remembers a typing game as a kid that did a good job of learning challenges and assessment. And Pat, did you learn to type from it?
You know, it was a part of that, learning to type. And the challenge in it, the gaming part, was they were speed, right? So you're competing against other people. So that was sort of the part that got you invested, because competition is a big, huge part of that. And then quality mattered in the assessment part. So you were scored on it. So it was a sort of a fun way to learn and get assessed at the same time. So I just, it's a good example of, I think, some of the things Noria is talking about that can suck you in and make it fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. So my last question was, what kind of skills work well to be assessed by games? So I mean, is it practical skills like typing or things, or is it also cognitive skills?
Cognitive skills, and also social emotional type of skills, workforce skills. I think those work well. But again, you have to be careful because games create and capture a lot of data. So you have to be careful about the constructed relevant variances as well. So you need to really talk to the psychometricians and set the goal and understand the objective right.
Oh, that sounds a really, really, really important point. Do you want to just very briefly expand on what kind of constructive relevant variances could be in there?
Well, for example, Gen Z people play games. So, they understand probably by nature how games are designed. So these, people who are used to games, not used to games, who are used to types of games, but not these type of games, these could be a huge variant.
No, that's a really good point. So thank you, Nori, and we appreciate it. It's very early in Tokyo, also that you're joining us, and thank you everybody also who's joining us in person and those who watch this on video. I'd now like to hand over to Pat, who's going to introduce Kimberly, and we're going to do the second half of this on technology enhanced items.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Nori, that was great. And it's my pleasure actually to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kimberly Swigert. Kimberly is the Director of Test Development Innovations at the National Board of Medical Examiners, or NBME. For those of you who aren't familiar with NBME, they're the people who license doctors, is the medical examiners part. I actually first met Kimberly several years ago. I was asking around at ATP on who was an expert on natural language processing, as my company was actually interested in adding an item banking feature where we would automatically detect item enemies in a large pool of items. And Kimberly was recommended to me as sort of an expert in this area, and she graciously agreed to give me some time. I quickly discovered she was an expert, and she really became one of my go-to people for talking about new technology in this area, machine learning, natural language processing in general, and automatic item generation. More recently, she's become involved in the technical, legal, and ethical factors of implementation of AI-based technologies in assessment. Dr. Swigert received her doctorate, and I decided I'd use her full name for this one because it's impressive. Her doctorate in quantitative psychology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly for her presentation on technology enhanced items. After her presentation is complete, just like John just did, I'll rejoin her for some questions and answers. Please add to the chat any questions you might have, and I'll try to include them in the follow-up. So turn it over to you, Kimberly. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's make sure, first of all, that you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So thank you, Pat, and also thank you, Norihisa. That was a lovely presentation. So as Pat mentioned, I'm Kimberly Swigert, and I'm here to talk to you today about technology enhanced items, or TEIs. So what are TEIs? I'm going to start out with an example of a standard MCQ. And just to warn you, you're going to see a lot of medical examples today because that's what we do at NBME. So I've tried to keep the examples pretty straightforward and hopefully not too gory. So this is a sample step 1 item from USMLE, which is the United States Medical Licensure Exam Series. And this is assessing whether or not the examinee understands what symptoms could be caused by which nutrient deficiencies. This is the kind of item that you can easily administer in a paper and pencil format. And we're not going to consider that a type of technology, unless we're talking about the printing press. But in 1999, all of our paper and pencil exams were converted over into CBTs, and that certainly allowed the use of technology to support more efficient and more secure delivery of our test material. But in my view, that does not make a standard MCQ administered on a computer a TEI. So I can think of 3 parts of the definition of what is a TEI. So the first is that the design of a TEI involves technology from the get-go. So we're not talking about retrofits to take, say, a static MCQ and then display it in another mode. We are talking about the use of technology as part of what the examinee views in the item, or how they move within the item, or respond to the item in a way that goes beyond the traditional assessment methods. And finally, TEIs follow the primary rule for innovations, which is that you use the technology when you need it, for the reason you need it, in our case, to measure a construct that you can't measure without it. So for the MCQ I just showed you, you could certainly create a TEI on that topic, but if the construct is effectively represented by a list of patient symptoms and all the examinee needs to do is figure out which specific vitamin deficiency is underlining it, you don't need a TEI to assess that. So I'm going to show you 3 examples from our organization that are TEIs. So the first example is the computer-based case simulations that play on USMLE Step 3, which is the exam taken by physicians in residency as the final milestone for them to demonstrate competency to practice unsupervised medicine in the US. So this is for GME training, and these are our most advanced groups in terms of the skill set. CCS is an entirely performance-based segment of the Step 3 exam. So when an examinee begins the CCS component, they see a screen that gives them standard categories from which they can choose, and they'll receive a case introduction with a brief synopsis of the situation, in this case, a 65-year-old man who's been brought to the emergency room. And as they keep clicking to receive case information, they'll then get more information about the patient that includes, for example, the vital signs. And I am not that kind of doctor, but I look at this and I think, okay, yeah, that pulse, that blood pressure, it's starting to look a little bit dicey here. And if you keep clicking, you find out, oh, in fact, this patient is 8 out of 10 on the pain scale. They were brought in an ambulance. This just happened. It's never happened before. And then this is the entirety of the information they are given about this patient to start. And once they click OK, they're now in the patient management system that we built that represents the CCS cases. And there's no queuing for what they're supposed to do next. They have to decide where to start, how to actively manage the patient. In this case, I've already clicked on the Write Orders or Review Chart icon. And when I got an order input screen, I began by typing in a complete blood count or CBC as my first order on the patient. So the examinee can request an interval history of the physical, they can write orders, review the chart, obtain results of physical exams or labs. They may need to change the location of the patient. They can see the progress notes, vital signs, all the lab reports, imaging, everything on the screen. And so this system, as you might imagine, has an enormous amount of text underlying it, the patient scripts, the physician tasks in response to the updates, because this is an active patient management system. The patient can get better, but the patient can also get worse if you're not doing the right things. Now, because of the fact that this went live in 1999, obviously this had to be doable without AI for any type of scoring. And the reason that it is doable without AI is because the text entry is very standardized. So for this particular case, the first thing that you might need to do might be to write an order for 4 blood tests. And the text entry to describe those is very standardized. It's what a doctor would type into your chart. It's what the system would recognize as the order. So because of this, you can, if you do all the work, you can put all the text within the system that would allow you to score everything the examinee enters, even though it's free text entry, because they're not really writing anything narratively. They are using medical acronyms and abbreviations to order actions for the patient. In addition, because this is so different from MCQs, the tutorial experience in this case was absolutely crucial. So what you're actually seeing here are the tutorial screenshots, and you could go to the USMLE page and go to the Step 3 practice material and take tutorial CCS cases for the reason that you not only need to know how to manage a patient, but you need to understand how to navigate the software. So this is an example of a TEI where capturing this, even with the standardized patient format, would still have been unworkable, because within the framework of an OSCE with a standardized patient, you could, speak to the patient and perform a physical exam, but in this system, they're getting blood results back in real time, they're getting X-ray results back in real time, and all of that required the use of technology to essentially mimic the patient management system. So for my next example, I'll take you back to MCQs, but I'll show you an innovative use of technology to assess a part of a construct that isn't really measured just with text, and those are the heart sound items that play on USMLE Step 2 CK and Step 3. So here's the original version of an MCQ that was used in development of heart sound items. The text that's in red is the explanation of what the doctor would hear if they used a stethoscope to listen to the patient's heart. And then this is, for example, how they might summarize it within a patient chart or a patient note. However, if we think about what construct we really want to assess here, we are in part assessing whether or not the examinee can gather and interpret this information. And in real life, that information does not get handed to them. They actually have to take a stethoscope, listen to the patient's chest. And if that's an important part of the construct, then it's worth it for us to find a way for technology to support us in doing this. But we still want to keep it in the context of an MCQ, because this is going to fit onto a timed licensure exam. So what we've done for heart sound items is to create and display an avatar of a patient where there are places provided on the patient's chest where you can place the stethoscope. You have a timer and you will actually listen to the heart sounds. So I'm going to play a quick video that shows you what would be going on the screen while the examinee is doing this and what you would hear. And hopefully this plays fine and you can hear everything. So what you can see is the sounds will change as you move the stethoscope. You can adjust the volume. You have a watch going, so you can time things. Apparently that's very important for the doctor to be able to figure out how fast your heart is beating in addition to how it sounds. You can go to full screen so that you, if you need to blow up the image and to be able to look at it. And then when you go back to the item, you can stop the sound. And at this point, you have the MCQ. So you've given the information on his patient. You've now listened to his heart, hopefully correctly, meaning you placed the stethoscope in the right place and heard the sounds and interpreted them correctly. And then you would answer which of the following is the most appropriate next step in management. So this is something that is intended to replace the artificial scenario of someone describing the sound of the heart sounds to you. And if you'd like to see a paper that was published fairly shortly after this item type came out, entitled "When Listening is Better Than Reading." And finally, I'm going to talk about an item type that we have that's in development. It's not currently being used on any of our exams. And this is the short answer rationale provision, or SHARP item. So in thinking back to the heart sounds items, we saw an MCQ that used technology to allow us to assess something that we couldn't really assess with just the text-based form of the MCQ. So it's worth taking a minute to step back and just think about the potential pros and cons of MCQs to start. We love MCQs. They're great for assessing knowledge efficiently. They minimize the reading load. They minimize sources of construct-irrelevant variance, as Norihisa just mentioned. They're easy to understand. You don't have to have too much of a tutorial usually, and easy to administer. However, MCQs don't capture the process directly. So they don't capture how the examinee arrived at the right answer. If you're really, really good at writing distractors, maybe you could make inferences from a wrong answer about where the examinee went wrong, but MCQs in general don't directly capture that. They capture the final product. They don't capture the performance or the process. And MCQs also allow for guessing, in the sense that the examinee knows the right answer is there somewhere. And if they have no idea what the answer is, they still have a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance of getting credit by guessing correctly. So if you're thinking, I want something that would fit onto perhaps an exam that's all MCQs, but I don't want to use an MCQ because I want to capture the process and I want to not enable guessing, you need to come up with a different format. So since we're talking about the medical education context, what do we mean when we say process? The process in our case would be, given that we are administering an exam for those who are in undergraduate medical education or GME, graduate medical education, is known as clinical reasoning. And in the context of our exams, this means we want to focus on the process of reasoning and evaluate the examinee's ability to justify their decisions in diagnosing patients, in treating patients, in managing patients. We want to know, did they get the right answer, but can they demonstrate how they got there? In other words, what did they use in their clinical reasoning to come to their conclusion? So in our case, for our examinees and our exams, we don't necessarily want to go the full CCS route. That's very interesting, but that's a full-on patient management scenario. We're interested in assessing students who are still in medical school, who are still learners. We need something that's gives them a little bit more than that to go off of, but we want to assess their clinical reasoning process, and we don't necessarily want to cue them. So in thinking about this, you can think about, well, we're interested in how they work with sources of information to show how they reach the diagnosis. Well, how does your physician do that? They may have a lot of information about you summarized in a patient chart. Some of that may be information you provided. Some of it may be information they thought to ask, results of lab tests, physical exams. And reasoning from there, a doctor should be able to evaluate all the information in front of them in the patient chart and come up with a conclusion. So that is what we decided to do for the SHARP items. So this is what a SHARP item would look like. they start out with essentially information in a patient chart format. And this is consistent with the patient chart format that we use for some of our MCQs as well. You've got the patient information, the history, you've got the physical exam, you've got some other physical findings. And what you don't have is a set of options to choose from. This is a free text response box where what we're asking them is, based on the information here, what is the most likely diagnosis for this patient? Now, whatever they enter, the system will capture. And then when they move forward, they will reach a screen that says, okay, what you indicated is that the diagnosis here is plantar fasciitis. What you must now do is indicate, by clicking on them, 5 pieces of information within this patient chart that supports your diagnosis. And this is interactive in the sense that it doesn't matter what they type as their diagnosis. That's going to show up on the screen. But then everything on the screen is clickable so that they can tell us, okay, the fact that they're an avid runner, the right heel pain, the musculoskeletal findings, that's why I think it's plantar fasciitis. So here we're assessing clinical reasoning by inferring from the pieces of information that they use to reach this conclusion. And if this person were to give a diagnosis that's nowhere near accurate, it would be very interesting to see what they selected. Or if they gave a right diagnosis, but they selected things that don't go with that diagnosis, then you have a scenario where maybe they just guessed as a diagnosis, but they can't actually back it up with the clinical reasoning. So you're getting more information about their thought process that's going into the right answer. As you can imagine, there are challenges with this type of item above and beyond when you're using MCQs. So you do need a substantial amount of research related to development, related to scoring, related to validity evidence. But you can also see how you could easily use this on an MCQ-based exam as just another item type, and it's not depending so much on a separate set of technology like the CCS cases do. However, what it likely requires, since we do have open-ended text boxes, is that we do need some kind of text capture and scoring in an NLP capacity. So if you would like to read where we are with that, there is an article that just came out last year that is specific to our ACTA, Analysis of Clinical Text for Assessment System, that is being used to score this item type, as well as the short answer questions part. And we had that as a separate individual item type on one of our exam programs. So to link all of this back to the guidelines, when thinking about these item types, I went through the guidelines and I wondered which of them would be applicable here, but perhaps more thought-provoking or more meaningful specifically for these type of items that have more interactive technology. And the first guideline, 1.16, says some TEIs may need additions or adaptions to address accessibility needs. And accessibility is a very big topic right now. And it's absolutely worth thinking about that if you go from an MCQ that requires them only to read text and then use a mouse to click on the right answer, when you introduce something like a heart sound, you are now essentially assuming that the examinee can hear well and that they are not the type of examinee who maybe they have a hearing disability, and for real life practice, they might use a special stethoscope that will give them a visual display of the information that they're hearing. The question then becomes, if we're using this type of item on one of our exams, do we need to have an alternate form of it for those type of examinees? And then what is that alternate form? Do we go back to just using the text like we used before? Do we figure out a way to have a visual display that still tests whether or not they know where to place the stethoscope? So you have these type of questions come up, and I think the addition of more technology, sometimes it's a solution to those types of questions, and then sometimes it's more of a challenge for those types of questions. For guideline 4.15, when you're using an AI-based scoring system, the algorithmic predictions, recommendations, outcomes, and prescriptive actions should be derived via transparent, ethical, and bias-free methods where you can explain, you can evaluate, and in fact, you could have internal as well as external experts evaluate. So in other words, for the smart items, I call them the smart items, the sharp items. If we're going to use an AI-based scoring system, we need to be able to show that that system is fair, what information is it using to do the scoring? How was the system trained to do the scoring? What exactly counts towards the scoring? And, you know, it's a little bit more, again, with an MCQ, it's pretty easy to show someone how you're scoring it. There's one right answer. If you click on it, you get all the credit. For the sharp, it could be something different. It's a matter of what you enter into the text box. It's a matter of what actions you select. And we would need to be transparent and clear with the examinee of how that scoring works so that we can say the scoring is fair. This is part of our validity evidence for the exam, and you can trust the outcome of an exam that uses sharp items. And then the third one is about validation for technology-based assessments. Should confirm that the infrastructure required to deliver and interact with the exam does not impede test takers' performance. This came up earlier when talking about using gaming technology. For any kind of technology-based assessment or TEI, the tutorial is going to be extremely important, but you need to think about things such as the topic that was, or the answer that was provided earlier to say, well, examinees who are used to playing a game that has this kind of format might be at an advantage. And then the question is, how do we design tutorials so that we can bring all of the examinees up to that level of performance? And related to that gaming question, we have breaking news at NBME. So as of last week, we have acquired the MedVR Education organization, which is an extended reality platform for healthcare skill development. So this includes virtual reality and includes augmented reality. Does this mean taking USMLE in the future is going to be as fun as playing Mario Kart? Probably not. However, it is very exciting for us that we have acquired the capabilities to look at some of these new types of assessment that could include something like gaming assessment for formative assessment, for preparing for assessments. We can look at their simulation platform, which is extensive. They have a lot of examples up already of how this has been used. There's also the extended reality, virtual reality platform. So as we start to think about this kind of future in assessment, certainly what you've heard here today from people like Norihisa is extremely important and informative, but the guidelines themselves, I think, are going to be very helpful in designing items and assessments that make use of this technology so that we can assure we're doing this in a fair way, we're doing this in a defensible way, we can demonstrate validity evidence, and that we can stand behind the technology that we're using as part of these new assessments. And so with that, thank you for listening.
Well, thanks, Kimberly. That was great. And I love and appreciate how you tied this back to the guidelines. I know I know John does too. So I do have lots of questions, though. I had some questions beforehand, and you actually got to a lot of them. I wanted to come back to your accessibility since you had just talked about that a second ago. And I thought you did a nice job of laying out sort of some of the options of either making it accessible or having an alternative form. But unless I missed it, I missed what you guys did at NBME. Are you requiring every item type to be accessible, or are you going back to, provide like a traditional item type?
So that is a topic of much discussion right now. We are focusing more on the accessibility piece, I think, than we ever have before. We do have accessible options for our current item types that are administered for USMLE in the high stakes format. As we are moving forward with new item types, of which Sharp is only one of them, we are trying to wrap the accessibility question in and always coming back to, can we ensure that we're measuring the construct we want to measure? Can we ensure that we are not adding construct irrelevant variance, that we are not using technology for the sake of technology, but so that we can use it to support our construct? But are we at risk with a new item type, for example, for the Sharp item? There's not a sound component to it, but they do have to be able to type and they do have to be able to click. So are there examinees that would need support in doing that? If so, we would need to have a way for them to navigate this item. So we are trying to think about that going forward. I think in the past, when we were just mainly relying on many MCQs, it was not as prioritized a topic, but it definitely is now.
Yeah, I would imagine, going back to the MCQs brings up all the baggage again with the MCQs, and then you're doing it for a
Yes.
limited population. Does that affect the meaningfulness of their score in some way
Yeah.
if you did it? So I can see
Yeah.
that. So, I've known about your case simulations for a long time. I've always been sort of amazed by some of it. But I don't know a lot about when you develop it. Like, do you think through like error paths? Like if they order like a drug to be administered, does the patient die? And, do you have to like, really build that out, as you go through something like that?
Yes, the case scripting and scoring process requires a really dedicated group of volunteers, board certified physicians and faculty. Yes, they build out the entire case. Obviously, a lot of what the examinee can do, if it's not in the script, it's not essentially going to have an impact, but it's timed. So, and it's part of USMLE. So they're not in there to, say, well, what happens if I do this? And what happens if I do that? They're on task. They're trying to think about how to manage the patient. There are things that they can do that count for them, and there are things that they can do that count against them. So if they do nothing, or if they are doing the wrong things, yes, the patient can get worse over time, sometimes dramatically so.
So you talked about AI and scoring, and I actually might have a few questions there. But before I go there, do you see AI? Do you have any kind of vision for using AI, in more of the process of delivering some future TEI item, or is it pretty much all back end stuff? Either for creation or scoring of the item.
I think at this point, in terms of both the need and the technology, using it for either content generation or scoring is probably where we and everybody else is going to land. That seems to be where the technology is more developed. That also seems to be where it would be more useful, because all of this started way back when with automated essay scoring, because there was just very much a need to allow people to write essays, but to be able to score a lot of people very quickly on those essays. So that's where it sort of all kicked off. I think we're open to exploring it in just about every area. But where we, at this point, have the most progress is the ACTA system, which is the capture and scoring of text, and then future exploration for content generation.
Okay, so I wanted to actually hit the scoring, and I think I have a couple of layers to my questions here. First, you talked about using natural language processing for scoring, and that makes a ton of sense. But before we even go there, I would think that for like the sharp items, it would seem like the possibilities aren't so infinite that you couldn't, you might be able to use for scoring more of just simple word lists that would be key correct. And of course, I've seen other programs do that. Is there a reason why you think that's just not good enough and you have to go to something more advanced?
It's more the trade-off of how authentic you want this to feel, because obviously with the MCQs on USMLE, we're sacrificing some authenticity by giving them the scenario and telling them, the right answer is here somewhere, and you don't have to come up with it, you have to select it. You could do something like a sharp item, perhaps with a very large drop-down menu, or some other limited set of choices. But then you're also giving them a little bit of queuing. So in our case, we really wanted this to be efficient and streamlined, but we wanted it to be more similar to what a physician would actually be doing, which is they have thoughts in their mind about what this could be. There's a lot of potential outcomes. There's potential diagnoses and management, but they have to type it in. So, but that is a trade-off that an organization could consider when doing an item type like this. But if you're going to allow for that kind of free text entry, and you're also going to consider it doing for items where you may be asking for information that is less standardized, such as what's the next step in managing this patient or what treatment you would give to this patient, then you need a system that can effectively be trained to handle whatever text they enter.
So my final question in scoring then comes from, I think one of the reasons we're probably going to all be reluctant to use AI in the middle of the assessment is we can't trust what we're going to get at any one moment, right? Especially right now where it's a little bit more flaky at times. And with natural language processing, you have, it's more algorithm based. It's more like kind of a guaranteed outcome to some degree.
Yeah.
Are you nervous about using AI for scoring because you can't trust it? I mean, I would think that would be a little bit of a concern.
I don't know that we see it so much as we can't trust it. The question is, can we train it well enough to then be able to use it and trust that it will be accurate?
And
So if that's
consistent,
and
right?
consistent. So if that's the way in which you're using trust, yes. It
Right.
is a matter, and this research is still ongoing. There's another pilot coming up for this item type that is starting in April. There's still a lot of work left to be done. But yes, we would need to feel assured that whatever we have developed to score this with the ACTA system, that it is reliable and accurate enough that we can then say, okay, anyone who takes this item type, we can just use this system to score them, and rest assured that it is accurate. Obviously, we would track that as we go along, but yeah, we still have a ways to go there.
So I have one more question before John
Okay.
cuts us off because I can see he's looming in the background. I'm just going to take it for granted that creating a TEI item can be more expensive. There's more you put into it. There's error paths, things like that. Does that mean that you think that a TEI item provides more information than it's worth 10 multiple choice questions from the amount of information? Because it also takes more time to deliver, and I would imagine that has to be factored in as well.
Yes. So yeah, I will go back to that rule of innovations where you do not use technology just because it exists. In an ideal process, you would say, what is lacking about my current assessment? What is crucial for the practice of medicine? Is it clinical reasoning? Is it teamwork? Is it communication? Are there crucial elements that we need to be able to measure that we can't measure in an MCQ format? And then it becomes, what technology would support this measurement? And then it becomes, what trade-offs are we getting? Step 3 is a 2-day long exam, and CCS takes up half a day. So we're acknowledging that if you take step 3, you're going to have to commit to 2 days of testing, and you are going to need to spend a half a day on just CCS because you have time to work through all the cases and you need to take so many cases. So yeah, you would have to address those trade-offs up front, but it should be a matter of, we need to make this trade-off, but what we're getting out of this trade-off is something that we just can't get at any other way.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. That was great.
Thank you.
It was great. If Pat, you and I can just run through a little bit of information for people at the end and people watching on the video. Here's where you can download the guidelines. There's also blog articles on the guidelines, recordings of the past roundtables, and you can follow us on LinkedIn. And if you're coming to Innovations, please join us for our breakfast on Tuesday morning. We'd love to see you. There's also a session where all 4 of us here are speaking at various times in Innovations. Norihisa and I are in a TBA committee session, and Kimberly and Pat are also speaking in other sessions. And if you've got any questions on the TBA committee, just reach out to me or Pat. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining and listening in person and remotely.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See
you.
ya.